Okay, let's unpack this. I want you to just take a second and picture a cow.
Right.
Just, visualize it. You are almost certainly picturing the exact same thing I am. A slow, sleepy, black and white grass muncher, just standing in some fenced-in green pasture.
Yeah, totally harmless.
Exactly. A creature that, it barely even registers a pulse,
Yeah.
just waiting patiently to be milked.
Well, what's fascinating here is how remarkably sanitized that image is.
Right.
We basically view cattle as this docile agricultural background noise. They're completely detached from the brutal realities of the actual food chain.
But what if I told you that gentle, everyday dairy cow is actually the direct genetic descendant of a literal walking, muscle-bound gladiator, an animal that actively hunted down the predators trying to kill it?
Oh, yeah. The ancestral bloodline it's terrifying, honestly.
It is. So today's deep dive is all about stripping away those 10,000 years of human domestication. We're looking at this incredibly comprehensive breakdown from the YouTube channel Wild Sciences, and they profile the 13 species of wild cattle still roaming the earth.
Which is a fantastic source, by the way. Very detailed.
Yeah, it's brilliant. So our mission today, it isn't just to list farm animals. We are analyzing nature's ultimate biological tanks. These are creatures locked in this endless, really high-stakes arms race with some of the deadliest predators on the planet.
Because, domestication essentially disarmed the bovine family tree.
How so?
Well, humans provided the fences, right? So the heavy armor, the weaponry, the extreme aggression, all of that was just bred out of them. But when you step past those fences and actually venture into the untouched jungles or plains or mountains...
The wild cousins are still there.
Exactly. The original ancestral engineering remains totally intact, and they rely on survival mechanics that are just raw and brutal.
Okay, so we have to start with the sheer scale of the apex brawlers in this family. Specifically the gaur.
Oh, the gaur is incredible.
Just the visual descriptions alone from the source material, they sound prehistoric. It roams the forests of South and Southeast Asia, and it carries this massive ridge of muscle right down its spine, and a bony forehead built like an actual siege ram.
Yeah, the physical metrics of the gaur are just staggering. A fully mature bull can weigh upwards of 3,300 pounds.
Wow.
That's 1,500 kilograms. And it stands an imposing 7.2 feet tall at the shoulder.
Wait, 7.2 feet?
Yeah.
At the shoulder?
Yeah. If you walked up to one, that ridge of muscle on its back would literally loom over your head.
That's insane.
Yeah.
And it shares its living room with the undisputed apex predator of that jungle environment.
Yeah.
The tiger.
Right.
And a tiger is a biological marvel, right?
Mm-hmm.
Engineered specifically for murder. Yet looking at the Wild Sciences data, it shows that a tiger will look at a healthy adult gaur and just actively walk away.
It's one of the only animals a tiger simply refuses to gamble on.
Why? Tigers take down huge prey all the time.
Because we're looking at a classic example of mutually assured destruction. For a tiger, a hunt is basically a caloric math equation.
Okay.
The sheer mass of the gaur acts as this impenetrable deterrent. To bring down a 3,300-pound animal, a tiger has to get a bite to the spine or the throat.
Which means getting really close to the pointy bits.
Exactly. It has to expose itself to a lethal kick or just being completely crushed. The biomechanics of the gaur's neck muscles alone, it can flick a 400-pound cat off its back with just a simple toss of its head.
Just swatting it away like a fly.
Yeah. So the tiger's survival instinct just overrides its hunger. It's not worth dying for a meal.
So the mass basically prevents the fight from ever happening. That's a solid strategy. But not all wild cattle rely purely on, the deterrent of just being a heavy frame. Some of them lean heavily into actual offensive weaponry.
Right, like the wild water buffalo.
Yes, it's slightly lighter than the gaur, but it replaces raw bulk with a profoundly violent toolkit.
Oh, absolutely. The wild water buffalo weighs in at around 2,645 pounds. Still massive, but its defining evolutionary feature is its horn structure.
The swordsman of the wetlands.
Precisely. They possess the longest horns of any wild cattle species on Earth. We're talking solid bone blades that sweep outward from the skull, often measuring well over 6.6 feet from tip to tip.
So imagine a set of handlebars wider than a standard doorway.
Right.
And they taper to these razor-sharp points, and they're bolted to an animal heavier than a grand piano.
And crucially, they have a famously short fuse.
Yes. They share these deep wetlands with tigers and crocodiles, and their default response to a threat isn't flight. It is an aggressive forward charge.
Yeah.
But this is what I don't get. It's like a minivan equipped with broadswords. But how does an herbivore or reptile, I mean, an animal that eats grass developed the psychological aggression to actively charge down an apex predator instead of just running away.
Well, it really comes down to the physics of their environment. In a deep, muddy wetland, building up the necessary escape speed is mechanically impossible.
Because they're bogged down.
Exactly. If you turn your back in deep mud, you die. So, evolutionary pressure flipped their survival strategy. Overwhelming offensive force became their only defense.
The best defense is a good offense.
Right. By maintaining a hair-trigger temper, the wild water buffalo creates this psychological tripwire in the ecosystem. Predators quickly learn that initiating an attack won't just result in a struggle.
It results in the predator being hunted.
Hunted, pursued, and impaled.
They make the cost of doing business entirely too high for the predator. It makes total sense. If you can't outrun the danger, you just have to become the danger.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that strategy takes a fascinating turn when we move out of the wetlands and onto the open plains, because out in the wide open, size and heavy horns aren't enough to save you. You have to develop a militaristic psychology.
You're referencing the African Cape buffalo?
The widowmaker.
Right. Frequently referred to in hunting circles as the widowmaker. And on paper, they are significantly lighter than the gaur or the water buffalo.
Right, like what, 1,500 pounds?
Yeah, a mature bull averages between 1,500 and 2,000 pounds. Yet, statistically, they are incredibly lethal. They're responsible for approximately 200 human fatalities annually across the African continent.
Wow.
Which is a number that actually surpasses lions.
That's terrifying. And it's the psychology that makes them so unsettling. It's like a vengeful action movie protagonist who refuses to die. They share these wide-open savannas with highly coordinated prides of lions.
There's nowhere to hide.
Right. So they've adopted this collective herd warfare mentality. When lions attack, the buffalo don't scatter in a blind panic.
No, they rally.
They rally. They group up, interlock their defenses, and actively fight back. Just tossing and stomping big cats into the dirt. It's so cinematic and brutal.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the anatomical centerpiece of this combat strategy is what's called the boss.
The helmet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The African buffalo possesses this thick, continuous shield of fused bone right across the top of its skull. Biomechanically, this is not just a helmet. It functions as a highly specialized, shock-absorbing crumple zone.
Oh, like in a car?
Yes. When a buffalo collides with a charging lion or, a rival bull, the boss distributes that massive kinetic payload outward across the skull. It prevents the cervical spine from taking the localized impact and just snapping.
It's a literal biological riot shield.
Yeah.
And the behavioral data from the source is just chilling. They are known to hold grudges.
The vindictiveness is unique, yeah.
If a human hunter wounds a Cape buffalo, it doesn't just run away to bleed out. It will double back, circle around through the dense bush, and actually set an ambush for the person tracking it.
It's calculated.
Calculated predatory behavior from an animal that eats shrubs.
It completely blurs the line between prey and combatant. The evolutionary crucible of the African savanna forged an animal that views preemptive violence as its ultimate life insurance policy.
Yeah.
But contrast that with the American bison, which occupies a very similar ecological niche on the open plains of North America. But it evolved an entirely different, incredibly athletic toolkit.
Yeah, let's talk about the American bison. Because we see them in old westerns and assume they're just sluggish, furry cows. But the mechanical output of this animal defies all logic. The stats you pulled on this are staggering.
Well, an adult American bison weighs roughly 2,200 pounds.
Okay.
But despite carrying that much mass, they are capable of sprinting at speeds approaching 40 miles per hour.
40 miles per hour.
For context, that outpaces the fastest human sprinters in recorded history. And furthermore, they can vertically jump nearly 2 meters from a total standstill.
Wait, really? A creature the size of a pickup truck sprinting like a racehorse and hurdling fences. How is that physically possible? What kind of biological engineering allows a ton of mass to just launch itself into the air like that?
It requires a drastic restructuring of the musculoskeletal system.
Yeah.
Take the massive hump on a bison's back, for instance.
Right, the big shoulder hump?
That isn't a storage reserve of fat like a camel's hump.
No.
It is a dense, heavily anchored block of muscle supported by elongated vertebrae.
Oh.
It acts as a biological cantilever system. It operates sort of like the counterweight on a trebuchet, supporting the immense weight of the head, which they use to plow through deep winter snows,
Right.
while also providing explosive leverage for the front legs. They're just packed with fast-twitch muscle fibers, evolved specifically to outmaneuver packs of wolves in short, violent bursts of kinetic energy.
It's literally a wrecking ball attached to a sports car engine.
Basically, yeah.
And it really explains why tourists who try to take selfies with them in national parks learn very quickly that you cannot outrun a bison.
No, absolutely not.
But as we pivot away from the open plains, the source material takes us into environments where the primary enemy isn't a predator at all, it's the planet itself.
Yeah, environmental pressure forces extreme physiological adaptations, and the wild yak is a perfect case study for this.
The tank of the mountains.
Right. It occupies the Tibetan Plateau, surviving at elevations exceeding 16,400 feet, where winter temperatures plummet to minus 40 degrees Fahrenheit.
Minus 40. It's a 2,200-pound barrel of muscle wrapped in a ground-length blanket of fur. But the cold is only half the problem, right? At 16,000 feet, the oxygen levels are incredibly sparse.
Very thin air.
So a normal animal carrying that much weight would asphyxiate just trying to walk up a hill, let alone, fight off a snow leopard.
So how does its internal engine keep running?
The wild yak has basically undergone a profound metabolic overhaul. They possess lungs that are significantly larger than a standard bovine, coupled with an incredibly high concentration of red blood cells to maximize oxygen binding in that thin air.
Right, to grab whatever oxygen is there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Furthermore, their digestive system, specifically the rumen, functions as an internal furnace.
Wait, their stomach is a heater?
Basically, yes. The fermentation process of digesting that tough alpine vegetation generates a massive amount of internal body heat, which is then trapped by that dense, multi-layered coat. They have essentially walled themselves off in an impenetrable biological ice fortress. They figured out how to weaponize their own digestion to survive the unsurvivable. That is so cool. But honestly, the most haunting part of this entire deep dive isn't the animals thriving in extreme environments today.
Yeah.
It's the ghost that haunts the entire family tree.
The aurochs.
The aurochs.
Yeah. The aurochs is really the baseline for all bovine power. Historically, this species ranged across Europe, Asia, and North Africa. It stood nearly 6 feet tall at the shoulder, weighed a ton, and wielded these long, forward-curving horns.
Just a monster.
The final recorded aurochs perished in a Polish forest in 1627. Yet it remains the direct genetic ancestor of every domestic cow, every piece of beef, and every glass of milk consumed globally today.
The historical lore surrounding the aurochs is wild to me. Julius Caesar wrote dispatches about encountering wild bulls in the European forests, claiming they were almost the size of elephants.
Right, a slight exaggeration.
Oh, clearly a terrified exaggeration from a Roman general, but it paints this visceral picture of the psychological terror these animals inflicted. They were highly aggressive and notoriously difficult to kill.
Very much so.
Which raises a massive question. If the aurochs was this relentless, elephant-sized monster out of Caesar's nightmares, how on earth did humanity manage to capture it, tame it, and shrink it down into the docile dairy cows we have today?
Well, domestication was not a sudden conquest, right? It was a slow, selective genetic filtering process. Early humans didn't tame the fiercest aurochs.
That'd be suicide.
Right. They likely captured the smallest, most docile calves, and over thousands of generations, humanity intentionally bred the aggression, the bone density, and the muscle mass out of them to make them manageable.
Just bred the fight right out of them.
Exactly. The ultimate irony of the aurochs is that its sheer size and wild aggression made it a prime target for hunting and habitat destruction, which led to its extinction. But its genetic line survived specifically because we softened it.
Wow.
Today, the heavily modified domestic descendants number in the billions. The evolutionary trade-off for global dominance was surrendering their wild armor.
They traded their broadswords and muscle for a guaranteed food supply and a secure fence.
It's a tragic bargain, really.
It is, and we see echoes of that near extinction with the European bison or the wisent. It's this 2,000-pound forest giant that almost suffered the exact same fate, right? Reduced to just 50 zoo animals in the early 1900s before finally bouncing back.
Yeah, a very narrow escape.
But the story changes entirely when we leave the giants behind. Because what happens to wild cattle when the environment refuses to support massive ton-heavy frames? What happens when they are trapped in dense jungles or on isolated islands?
Right. The evolutionary strategy has to pivot from overwhelming bulk to stealth and hyper-specialization. The banteng of Southeast Asia really exemplifies this. It is leaner, elegantly built, and relies on slipping silently into the dense forest underbrush to avoid tigers, rather than facing them head-on.
The supermodel of the cattle world.
Exactly. Then you have the Coupre, A massive Cambodian forest bovine with uniquely frayed horns. It historically fought leopards and tigers, but hasn't been reliably sighted in decades. It's largely considered a phantom species today.
So relying on the stealth approach. But what if you don't even have the luxury of a large forest? The attitude shifts drastically when we look at the island-dwelling dwarf cattle.
Yes.
We are talking about the Tamaraw from the Philippines. This animal is only 1 meter tall. It tops out around 440 to 660 pounds. Next to a gaur is basically a pocket-sized cow.
True.
But researchers note it is fiercely aggressive, armed with these sharp V-shaped horns.
Well, this introduces the biological principle of insular dwarfism.
Okay, what is that?
When a large species is isolated on an island with limited caloric resources, evolutionary pressure naturally selects for smaller body sizes. However, shrinking your body size presents a lethal problem.
Could your bite size now?
Right. You lose the physical mass required to intimidate predators. So to compensate for the loss of bulk, the Tamaraw evolved an incredibly defensive, high-aggression temperament.
It's the ultimate bar fight underdog. It's the tiny guy who knows he's giving up 500 pounds to the bouncer, so he just bypasses all the posturing and swings a pool cue at the bouncer's knees.
That's a great analogy.
It completely refuses to act its size. And we see that exact same genetic spite in the Anoa of the Indonesian island of Sulawesi.
The lowland and mountain Anoa really push that dwarfism to the extreme. The mountain Anoa weighs roughly 330 pounds. That is effectively the size of a large goat.
Wow.
If you saw one navigating the thick underbrush, your brain wouldn't even register it as cattle. But they possess these short, incredibly straight, spear-like horns, and they are highly unpredictable and defensive.
Wait, why straight horns? The giant cattle we talked about earlier, like the water buffalo, they have these massive sweeping curves.
It's an adaptation to the dense foliage. Sweeping horns would just get constantly tangled in vines and branches.
Oh, that makes sense.
A short, straight horn functions like a dagger. It allows the Anoa to plunge forward through the thick brush without snagging, delivering a concentrated puncture wound to any predator that corners it.
Nasty.
They are secretive, highly efficient assassins of the underbrush. But, this hyperspecialization is a double-edged sword.
Why is that?
Their aggressive nature repels natural predators, sure, but their restricted island habitat leaves them uniquely vulnerable to human expansion. When an island forest is cleared, a cornered fighter has absolutely nowhere left to retreat.
Yeah, you can fight off a wild dog, but you can't headbutt a bulldozer.
Exactly.
It's an unsettling reality. And that perfectly sets the stage for the final entry on the Wild Sciences breakdown. The outro to this whole evolutionary saga is a creature that completely abandons the horns, abandons the aggression, and subverts everything we've discussed today.
The Saola.
Yes, its entire survival strategy is to just become a ghost.
It really completely dismantles the walking tank archetype. The Saola weighs a mere 176 to 220 pounds and possesses this slender, delicate frame. It resembles an antelope far more than a bovine.
It's so elusive, it actually earned the nickname the Asian unicorn. And to me, the most shocking data point of this entire deep dive is that Western science didn't even know the Saola existed until 1992.
1992, yeah.
That's practically yesterday. It's the first large land mammal discovered anywhere in the world in over half a century. And it survives deep in these mist-shrouded Annamite mountains along the border of Vietnam and Laos.
And if you're wondering how an animal the size of a large dog survives in mountains historically patrolled by leopards and tigers, the answer is absolute invisibility.
Pure stealth.
The Saola's biology is entirely geared toward remaining undetected. It moves silently, it leaves minimal tracks, and it avoids open spaces at all costs. But despite this flawless evolutionary stealth, habitat fragmentation has really pushed them to the brink.
Yeah.
It hasn't been captured on a wildlife camera trap in over a decade, and conservative estimates suggest there may be fewer than 100 individuals remaining in the wild.
It was never built for war.
Yeah.
It was built to hide. And right now, it's just quietly fighting to keep its species on the board. The sheer spectrum of this family tree is just mind-bending to me.
It forces a complete reevaluation of what cattle actually means.
Right.
I mean, you have the armor-plated gaur relying on mutually assured destruction against tigers. You have the Cape buffalo deploying militarized herd tactics against lions.
The wild yak running an internal furnace at 16,000 feet.
Exactly. And then the fragile Saola just fading into the mountain mist.
It's brilliant. So the next time you, the listener, find yourself driving past a picturesque farm and you look over the fence at a herd of quiet black and white cows slowly chewing the grass, I want you to take a longer
Oh,
look.
absolutely.
You aren't just staring at livestock. You are looking at the subdued, living descendants of armored walking tanks. That sleepy animal shares a bloodline with swordsmen carrying 6-foot bone blades, with widowmakers who literally fracture the skulls of lions, and with scrappy island assassins. That passive domestic exterior is masking millions of years of brutal, bloody evolutionary combat.
The DNA of survival is still in there, you know? It's
Yeah.
quietly buried beneath the surface.
Which leaves me with a final, lingering thought for you to carry into your day. If the harmless, everyday dairy cow was reverse-engineered from a lineage of terrifying, tiger-fighting gladiators, what other seemingly quiet, domesticated animals sitting in your living room or your backyard right now are secretly harboring a violently brutal evolutionary past, just waiting for the right environment to wake it back up?